My wife's been busting her tail for 3 months now, and her stuck-up jerk of a boss hasn't paid her a single cent. When she finally worked up the guts to call him out on it, he just sneered at her and said, "You don't mean squat to me, and I'll toss you some cash whenever I feel like it." Hey there, thanks for sticking with us and showing your support, it really keeps us going. If you're digging the tales we're spinning, how about hitting that subscribe button to help us hit our first 1,000 fans? Oh, and drop a comment with the city you're tuning in from, we might just give you a holler in the next one. Today, we're sending a big shout out to Emil Jensen over in Denmark, glad you're enjoying the ride, buddy. Alright, let's get into the meat of this story. The clock on the wall was ticking steady and slow, like it was mocking me with every beat while I stood outside Edward Vance's office. It was late in the afternoon, and the light coming through the windows at Apex Innovations was this dull, heavy gray that made everything feel like it was sinking underwater. My hands were shaking, not out of nerves, not yet anyway, but because I was dog-tired from hauling around 3 months of frustration like a sack of bricks, 3 months of late nights, sweating bullets over spreadsheets, racing against deadlines that never let up, 3 months of Edward feeding me lines like, "Hang tight, Isabella, the paycheck's on its way," while my bank account sat empty as a ghost town. Today, I couldn't take it anymore, today, I snapped. I shoved the door open, and the hinges squealed like they were trying to warn me to turn back, but I wasn't listening. There was Edward, lounging like some big-shot kingpin, kicked back in his fancy leather chair with that cocky grin smeared across his mug. His office stunk of overpriced cologne and day-old coffee, a combo that twisted my gut into knots. His desk was a mess, but not with the stuff I'd been slaving over, nah, it was littered with shiny brochures for some hotshot project he wouldn't shut up about. He didn't even bother looking up at first, just kept clicking his pen against a glass, that annoying tap-tap-tap boring into my head like a drill. "Edward," I said, keeping my voice solid even though I felt like a wreck inside, "we gotta hash this out." He finally flicked his eyes up at me, cold and gray like the floor tiles I was standing on. Well, Isabella," he drawled, dragging my name out like it was some kind of joke, "what's eating you now? Begging for extra hours again? You're starting to sound like a scratched-up CD." I choked down the bitterness in my throat, the kind that comes from all those nights I spent here instead of home with Mateo. "It ain't about overtime. It's my pay. 3 months, Edward. I haven't seen a dime in 3 months. Bills are stacking up, my car's one sputter from the scrap heap, and you keep telling me to sit tight. I'm done sitting." He let out this quick, nasty laugh, like a jab straight to my face. Then he stood up, slow and cocky, looming over his desk like a buzzard eyeing a carcass. His suit was sharp, custom-made, stuff I couldn't dream of buying even if he'd paid me on time. He folded his arms, that smirk stretching wider, and I swear I caught a glint of pure meanness in his eyes, like he got a kick out of seeing me twitch. "Isabella," he said, his voice dropping low and oily, "you're a nobody to me. Zilch. I'll pay you when I feel like it, if I feel like it. You think you're hot stuff 'cause you shuffle papers and meet deadlines? You're a dime a dozen, a gear in the machine. So scoot on back to your desk, keep plugging away, and maybe I'll toss you a scrap when I'm in the mood." It was like the air got sucked clean out of the room, my chest squeezed tight, and a hot rush climbed up my neck, not shame anymore, but this fierce, ragged anger. A nobody. After I've been dragging this company through the mud, keeping clients smiling while he's out swinging clubs and sipping bourbon. My hands balled into fists, nails biting into my skin, and for one crazy second, I pictured myself vaulting over that desk and smacking that grin right off his smug face. But I held back. I spun around, my shoes clicking loud on the floor like firecrackers, and stormed out, his cackle chasing me all the way down the hall. The ride home was a haze, headlights bleeding into blurry lines, the radio hissing static in my ears. His words kept looping in my head, each one stabbing deeper, "A nobody to me." By the time I rolled into our driveway, the sky had turned a beat-up purple, and my grit had sharpened into something fierce. No way was I letting him come out on top, not like this. Mateo was in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves shoved up, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo that wrapped the house in this warm, homey smell. He's my rock, those deep eyes that catch everything, hands that can fix anything or break it just as easy. I dumped my bag by the door with a thump that made him look over. "Tough one today?" he asked, his voice low and gentle, but with that solid edge I've leaned on forever. I didn't shoot an answer back right off the bat. Instead, I just flopped into a chair, kicked my shoes off, and let the bone-deep tiredness sink in like a heavy fog. Then it all came pouring out, every damn thing, Edward's slimy smirk, those cutting words of his, how he'd made a joke out of 3 months of my life. My voice broke near the end, and I hated how shaky I sounded, hated feeling so small, but Mateo didn't even blink. He put the spoon down, swiped his hands on a towel, and dropped to his knees right in front of me, resting those steady hands on my legs. "He said that to you?" His voice came out low, almost growly, like thunder rolling in slow and mean. I caught his jaw clenching, a little twitch popping under the scruff, and something dark and calculating flickered in his eyes, something I couldn't quite pin down. "Yeah," I muttered, swiping at my cheeks, mad as hell at the tears I couldn't keep in check. And he wasn't kidding, Javi. Looked at me like I was gum stuck to his fancy loafers. Mateo got up, moving slow and smooth, but there was a spark in him now, a heat I hadn't seen in ages. He turned back to the stove, but his hands clamped onto the counter, knuckles going pale. "He's gonna wish he'd kept his mouth shut," he mumbled, so soft I almost didn't catch it. "Believe me, Isabella, that guy's got payback coming." I scrunched my brow, tilting my head at him. "What's that supposed to mean? What can we even do? He's got Apex locked down like he's the king of the castle." Mateo didn't say a word at first. He just kept stirring the pot, the spoon scraping metal in the quiet like a slow drum roll. Then he glanced over at me, a faint grin tugging at his mouth, not the cozy one I loved, but something edgy, something that sent a chill racing down my back. "Don't sweat it," he said. "Grab some food, crash out. Tomorrow's a fresh start." I wanted to push him, to crack open whatever that weird glint in his eyes meant, but I was too wiped out, too spooked. So I just nodded, letting the smell of that warm dinner drag me back from the brink. We ate without much chatter, just the clatter of forks and the fridge's low hum filling the air. But as I sat there watching Mateo across the table, his eyes off somewhere else, I couldn't shake this gut feeling that things were moving, something huge he wasn't letting me in on. Later, after I'd hauled myself into bed, the day still sitting heavy on my chest like a brick, I heard him messing around in the study, the quiet click of the keyboard, papers shuffling around. I started drifting off, catching the faint murmur of his voice on a call, too muffled to make out. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't have guessed, was that Mateo wasn't just my husband anymore. He'd turned into this shadow pulling levers behind the scenes, scribbling out a letter that'd burn Edward's whole world down by sunrise. And me? I was about to stumble right into a hurricane I never saw brewing. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the blinds at Apex Innovations like a razor, carving sharp streaks across the carpet as I walked through the front doors. My heels snapped against the tiles, each step pounding in my chest like a war drum, loud enough to drown out the AC's hum and the faint buzz of folks trickling in early. I wasn't the same Isabella who dragged out of here yesterday, crushed under Edward's poison words. Nope, something had flipped overnight, something Mateo had kicked off, though I barely knew the start of it. All he'd said over breakfast was, "Head to work, Isabella. You're running the show now." His eyes had this fire, this rock-solid sureness I couldn't fight, even as my stomach did flips. Running the show? Me? I'd hardly slept, stuck replaying his spooky promise, "He's gonna pay," and wondering what in the hell he'd pulled off. The elevator ride up to the 5th floor dragged on forever, each ding shaking my nerves like a loose wire. I caught my reflection in the shiny steel doors, bags under my eyes, hair yanked back tight, a navy blazer that felt more like a shield than a jacket. I didn't look like some big shot CEO, I looked like a gal who'd been scraping by on empty for months. But when those doors slid open, I squared my shoulders, gripping the leather folder Mateo had shoved into my hands that morning. Inside was one lone page, stamped with some logo I didn't know and words I hadn't had a chance to wrap my head around: Apex Innovations under new ownership. Isabella Vega, Chief Executive Officer. My pulse was hammering as I crossed the open office, weaving past cubicles humming with hushed chatter, and made a beeline for Edward's, my office. The door was still cracked open from yesterday, his cologne hanging in the air like a stubborn ghost. I dropped the folder on the desk, my fingers grazing the smooth leather of his chair, my chair now. I eased into it, the cushion groaning under me, and for a second, I just took a deep breath. From up here, the view felt bigger, the city stretching out past the glass like it was mine for the taking. But that peace didn't stick around. Out in the hall, a ruckus kicked up, yelling, boots stomping closer, and I knew exactly who was coming before the door slammed wide open. Edward Vance came barreling in like a tornado on a rampage, his face all red and scrunched up, clutching a wadded-up letter in his meaty fist. His tie was crooked, his hair sticking out every which way, not a trace of the slick, smug jerk who'd looked down his nose at me the day before. "What in the hell is this supposed to be?" he bellowed, smacking the paper down on the desk so hard the glass tumbler shook like it was scared. I didn't jump, at least not where he could see it, though my heart was pounding like a jackrabbit caught in a snare. I peeked at the letter: termination of employment, effective immediately. Down at the bottom was Mateo's handwriting, those familiar loops I'd seen on shopping lists and little love notes, now carrying a weight I couldn't wrap my head around. "Edward," I said, keeping my tone even despite the way my hands were quaking under the desk. I got to my feet, locking eyes with his furious stare. "You're finished here. Apex has new owners, and I'm the one calling the shots now. We don't need you anymore." The words dropped like a brick between us, thick and cutting, and for a split second, I saw him reel, eyes popping wide, jaw hanging loose, like I'd just socked him in the stomach. Then the anger hit, wild and fierce. "You?" he snarled, stepping in close, his breath stinking of stale coffee and pure hate. "You think you can just stroll in here and snatch my company? You're a nobody, Isabella, a jumped-up paper pusher with big dreams. Who's behind this? Some lowlife stunt to make me look like a fool?" I didn't budge, even though every nerve in me was yelling to back off. "It's no stunt," I shot back, my voice climbing loud enough to slice through his rant. "It's a done deal. My husband, Mateo Vega, owns Apex now. He picked it up a month ago and handed me the reins. You're the one who's out on his ass." Edward went still, the name hitting him like a brick to the skull. "Vega," he grumbled, then let out this crazy, broken laugh that sent a shiver racing down my back. "That sneaky son of a gun. I should have figured he'd try something this dirty. But you're nothing without him tagging along. You think you've got what it takes to run this place? You'll tank it, and I'll be right there laughing when you do. Get out," I snapped, jabbing a finger toward the door. My first order as CEO, and it buzzed through me like a jolt of thunder, scary and thrilling all at once. "Security's coming. Don't turn this into a bigger mess than it already is." He lurched forward, slamming his palms on the desk so close I could see the veins throbbing in his neck. "This ain't finished," he hissed. "You'll both wish you'd never crossed me. I'll rip this company apart before I let you park your ass in my chair." Then he whirled around and stormed out, his swearing bouncing off the walls as he bulldozed past Lila from accounting, who'd poked her head in to gawk at the showdown. The door banged shut, and I dropped back into the chair, my breathing all ragged and uneven. For a second, the office went dead quiet, then the whispers kicked up outside. I could hear them through the glass, a swarm of voices buzzing like bees. "Isabella. CEO. Edward's toast." I stood up again, tugging my blazer straight, and stepped out to face the crowd. Head swiveled my way, some eyes big with shock, others squinting with doubt, and a couple, like Trent from sales, Edward's little shadow, glaring at me like I'd stolen their lunch. Lila tipped me a quick nod, still hugging her calculator like a lifeline, but Trent just crossed his arms, sizing me up like a prize steer. "Morning, folks," I said, pushing my voice out loud and clear across the room. "I know this is coming out of left field, but Apex is mine to run now. Edward's history, and we're charging ahead. I'll fill you in more later, but for now, let's get cracking." A wave of noise rolled through, some weak applause, a couple of mumbled, "Yes, ma'am, yes," and a stare from Trent that screamed trouble down the road. I turned back to the office, my legs wobbly as hell, and shut the door behind me. Alone again, I flattened my hands on the desk, staring at that crumpled termination letter Edward had left behind. My first swing as boss had landed, but it felt like I'd just stepped onto a wobbly tightrope with a pit of rattlers waiting below. They were all watching, Edward, the team, maybe even Mateo from wherever he was holed up, and I wasn't sure if I'd soar or crash. Out in the hall, security rolled in, their radios snapping and popping as they hauled Edward out of the building. His voice rang out one last time, dripping with poison, "You'll pay for this, Vega." Then a thick, heavy quiet blanketed Apex. I plopped down, flipped open the portfolio, and stared at the words next to my name, Chief Executive Officer. It was real, no kidding, it was mine. But as the whispers outside got louder, creeping through the glass, I couldn't help wondering, could I keep this thing steady, or would Edward's threat be the spark that torched it all to the ground? The air at Apex Innovations had a different bite to it now, still stale, sure, but mixed with this thick, gritty weight that stuck in my throat like dust kicked up from a busted old scam. It was Tuesday, 3 days since I'd planted myself in Edward's chair, and the office was humming with this jittery vibe I couldn't shake off. Phones kept ringing with nobody picking up, keyboards tapped like they were half asleep, and every look thrown my way felt like a pop quiz I wasn't sure I'd ace. I'd spent those 3 days holed up in that glassbox office, glaring at a computer screen that might as well have been a maze with no exit, trying to figure out what the heck I'd stepped into. CEO, the word still hung on me like a jacket 3 sizes too big, stiff and awkward, but Mateo's voice kept rattling around in my skull, "You're the boss now, Isabella. You've got this in the bag." Man, I wanted to buy into that, I really did, but the ugly truth was clawing its way out, and it wasn't looking good. That afternoon, Lila was standing across from me, her skinny frame hunched over a pile of dusty ledgers she'd dragged up from the basement. She'd been the only one gutsy enough to come near me since Edward got the boot, quiet little Lila from accounting, with her sharp eyes, trusty calculator, and that no-nonsense way of talking that sliced right through the clutter. "Something's fishy," she told me yesterday, shoving a spreadsheet in my face. "These numbers are way off, Isabella, not even in the ballpark." Now, with the clock creeping past 3, we were up to our necks in financial reports, empty coffee cups scattered across the desk like casualties, the room getting gloomier as the sun dipped below the city's jagged skyline. "Look at this," Lila muttered, her voice hushed as she slid a printout my way. Her finger jabbed at a line lost in a mess of digits, vendor payment, 50 grand, 3rd quarter. No invoice, no proof it got delivered, just poof, vanished. And it's not the only ghost in the stack. I squinted at the sheet, my gut twisting up tight. Vanished? What do you mean? Where'd it disappear to? She flipped open another ledger, her hands moving fast, almost jittery. Right here, 75 grand wired to some outfit called Dutton Enterprises. No contracts, no receipts, nothing. I've been digging through this stuff for hours, Isabella, and there's dozens more like it, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million, drained off over the past year. The figures blurred in front of me, hard and mean, like they were pointing fingers. I clamped my hands on the desk's edge, the wood digging into my skin. "Edward," I hissed, the name sour as hell on my tongue. He wasn't just jerking me around on my paycheck, he was looting the whole damn company blind. Lila gave a tight nod, her mouth pressed into a grim line. Sure seems like it. But we need hard evidence, something concrete. If he buried this, he buried it good. We kept at it, the hours melting into a fog of ink and coffee fumes. The office cleared out, leaving just the buzz of the overhead lights as darkness snuck in. I was about ready to throw in the towel when Lila fished a beat-up thumb drive out of her bag, said she'd found it stashed in Edward's old filing cabinet, hidden behind a bottle of bourbon. She jammed it into the computer, and up popped a password box. My heart kicked up a notch. Try Kingpin, I tossed out, half kidding, but Lila's fingers zipped across the keyboard, and bam, the screen opened up. Files spilled out like dirty laundry, locked up spreadsheets, bank records, emails. I sucked in a breath as I scrolled through, each click peeling back more of Edward's slime, offshore accounts, phony invoices, a note to some guy named Tony Dutton, shift the cash before the audit hits, they'll never catch it. Then, tucked in a folder labeled Insurance, I hit the jackpot, a transfer log showing $200,000 yanked from Apex's payroll account straight into Edward's personal stash in the Cayman Islands, stamped 2 weeks back. My missing pay, everybody's missing pay, sitting pretty in his pocket while he grinned and called me a nobody. I rocked back in the chair, the creak loud enough to jolt Lila. That rotten jerk, I barked, my voice bouncing off the walls. He didn't just screw me, he screwed every last one of us and figured he'd skate free. Lila's eyes lit up, fierce and locked on me. He's not getting away with it, not if we hand this over to the cops or whoever's calling the shots now. Mateo. My brain snapped to him, to that low, steady promise he'd made. I snatched my phone, 9:47 p.m. glowing on the screen, and bolted for the elevator. I had to get home, spill this to him, and figure out what we were gonna do next. The city lights streaked by as I floored it home, that thumb drive sitting heavy in my pocket like a live grenade, every flicker of shadow on the road looking like Edward ready to pounce. I stumbled through our front door, and there was Mateo, shirt hanging loose, a glass of red wine in his grip, the kitchen wrapped in this cozy garlic and thyme smell. He clocked me right away, eyes wide and crazy, panting like I'd run a marathon, and set his drink down fast. What's going on? He asked, closing the gap between us in a few quick steps. I thrust the drive up, my voice wobbling with a mix of victory and rage. Edward's been ripping off Apex, Javi, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. It's all right here, solid proof he's a crook and a lowlife. His expression turned stormy, but his hand on my arm stayed warm and firm. That's huge, he said, his tone deep and steady. You've nailed him, Isabella, you're running the show now. I knew you had it in you. I wanted to soak up that confidence, but worry gnawed at me like a stray dog. I'm not so sure, Javi. This is massive, way over my head. What if I can't pull it off? The crew barely buys into me as it is, and this could blow the whole place sky high. He tugged me in close, his breath brushing my hair. You're not flying solo here. I've got your back, and you've got the guts for this. Prove it to them, Isabella, show that jerk who you really are. I nodded, hanging on to his words like a lifeline, but that drive felt like a brick against my side. While I was picking apart Edward's rotten kingdom back at Apex, he was across town in some dingy bar, scheming to torch mine. I didn't have a clue yet, but Edward had tracked down Tony Dutton, a wiry guy with a jagged scar slicing his cheek and a voice rough as a gravel pit. They were hunched over a table, a laptop casting a pale glow between them, hammering out fake papers, lies about Mateo, about me, about Apex. Vega thinks he's got this in the bag, Edward growled, his shaky fingers banging the keys, but I'll bury him, and her too. The night dragged on, and while I lay restless next to Mateo with that thumb drive sitting on the nightstand like a loaded pistol, Edward's panic was turning into a full-on battle plan. I dug up his dirt, but he was gearing up to sling it back, quicker, nastier, and aimed right at me. Friday morning rolled in, 5 days since I'd claimed Edward's chair, and it felt like the whole city was yelling my name, or at least that's how the headlines hit me. The air outside Apex Innovations was buzzing with this tight, electric edge I couldn't see but sure as hell felt. I'd barely caught a wink of sleep, my brain still humming with the thumb drive secrets, when Mateo's phone started going nuts at the crack of dawn. He shot up beside me, his face hard as granite as he flicked through alerts, news pop-ups, texts, a tidal wave of chaos crashing into our peaceful bedroom like a busted levee. "Isabella," he said, his voice clipped, "flip on the TV." I scrambled for the remote, my hands fumbling with this sinking feeling I couldn't pin down, and there it was on the screen. The Channel 7 morning anchor, her usual perky grin gone grim, was reading off a headline that knocked the wind right out of me: Apex Innovations owner slammed with wage theft, exploitation claims, whistleblower drops bombshell files. The TV flashed blurry scans, letters, emails, payroll sheets, all cooked up to make Mateo look like some greedy monster who'd snatched Apex to drain it dry, working folks like me to the bone for nothing. My name was splattered in there too, dragged through the mud: Isabella Vega, wife and stooge CEO, in on her husband's dirty game. The room tilted, the remote slipping out of my sweaty grip as Mateo muttered a string of curses, already punching his lawyer's number into his phone. Edward. Had to be that slimeball. He hadn't just crawled off to lick his wounds, he'd come swinging, fast and fierce, with lies so slick they almost sounded legit. By the time I rolled into Apex, the story was everywhere, lobby TVs blaring it, phones lighting up in people's hands, the whole city gulping down his venom like cheap beer. I pushed through the front doors, my blazer feeling like a bullseye pinned to my back, and the whispers crashed over me like a tide, eyes flicking my way, some puzzled, some flat-out blaming, the air turning thick with mistrust. I'd barely gotten to my office when Trent from sales, Edward's slimiest yes-man, planted himself in my path, arms folded tight, his smirk sharp enough to slice through steel. "So," Trent sneered, his voice booming across the floor loud enough to turn heads, "you and your man think you can jerk us around? Keep us broke while you rake it in. Edward pegged you right, a total fake." I stopped dead, heat rushing up my neck like a wildfire. "That's a load of crap," I fired back, my tone wobbly but solid. "You've seen the real books, Edward's the one who ripped us off. This is him hitting back." Trent let out a harsh, icy chuckle. "Yeah, right, Isabella. Keep feeding yourself that line. We ain't swallowing it." He spun on his heel, leaving his venom to sink in, and I caught too many nods out there, way too many. Edward's poison wasn't just in the numbers, it had seeped into them. I stormed into my office and slammed the door, the glass shaking like it might crack, then dropped into the chair. My phone buzzed to life, Mateo firing off texts, PR's on the case, legals suing for defamation, hang tough. But tough felt like a distant dream. The walls started creeping in, the city's hum outside the window swelling into this loud, judging growl. I flipped open my laptop, and emails came flooding in, reporters sniffing around, clients asking questions, even a board member barking for explanations. Apex was wobbling on the edge, and I was the one stuck holding it steady, me, the gal who'd barely slept, still hearing Edward's "you're nothing" echo every time it got quiet. That night, home didn't feel like a safe haven. Mateo was pacing the living room like a caged bear, phone glued to his ear, his voice climbing as he tore into his crisis crew. "No, we hit back now, hard facts, not fluffy talk." He banged the phone down, dragging a hand through his hair, and I saw the wear, anger carving grooves into his face, a guy who'd built a kingdom now scrapping to save it. I hovered in the doorway, clutching a glass of water I hadn't touched, and our eyes locked. "They're lapping it up, Isabella," he said, his tone dropping low and beat. "Edward's coming out on top." "He's not," I shot back, but it rang empty in my ears. "We've got the real story, his stealing, the drive. We just need to. Facts don't mean squat if they won't buy it," he cut in, sharp, then flinched and softened. "Sorry. I just didn't figure he'd go this low." I set the glass down, my hands jittery. Me neither. But he's dragging us under, Javi, and it's pulling us apart. The space between us got heavy, this unspoken strain sneaking in. He reached out, but I stepped away, needing air, needing room to think. Come morning, Apex was a war zone. I walked in and spotted a knot of folks by the break room, their voices low but cutting, slicing through the coffee maker's drone. I slowed down, catching bits and pieces. If she's in on it, why should we follow her? My gut dropped. It was Sarah from marketing, her words bitter as hell, backed up by Trent's gruff rumble. She's no boss, just Mateo's parrot. Edward called it. I flattened myself against the wall, out of sight, their jabs sinking deep like a blade. They didn't trust me, not my lead, not my side of things. I was losing the whole damn crew, losing it all. Right then, I could have bolted, run back to Mateo, let him patch it up, but something in me broke loose, a flicker sparking in the gloom. No way. Edward wasn't taking this, not with his bull, not like this. I pulled myself straight, my pulse thumping like a battle march, and charged to my office. Lila was waiting, eyes red-rimmed but steady, clutching a pile of printouts, the raw truth, Edward's thievery spelled out plain. We've got plenty, she said, fierce as a hawk. You just gotta make em see it. I swallowed hard and nodded. I will. No more leaning on Mateo's plays, this is my fight. I scooped up the files, their heft anchoring me, and turned to tackle the mess. Edward's counterpunch had rocked Apex to its bones, but I wasn't his pawn, or Mateo's either. I was the one in this seat, and I'd damn well show it. The city might be howling, the staff might be waffling, but I was through buckling. Time to swing back. The Apex conference room stank of old donuts and tense sweat, a big glass and steel box that grabbed noise and threw it back like a slap. It was Monday morning, the city still chewing on Edward's lies, and I stood at the head of this long table, staring down a crowd of faces, 43 workers, some slumping, some stiff as boards, all waiting for me to prove I wasn't the con the headlines were screaming about. My hands clamped tight around a stack of files, the corners biting into my skin, and my blazer hugged me snug, like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart while the rest threatened to rip wide open. Trent leaned in with a lazy drawl, his voice carrying loud enough to bounce off every corner of the floor. So, you and your hubby reckon you can toy with us all? Let us scrape by while you're pocketing the cash. Edward had you pegged, a total sham. I stopped cold, a flush burning up my cheeks like a furnace kicking on. That's garbage, I shot back, my words trembling but holding steady. You've seen the honest numbers, Edward's the crook who bled us dry. This is him clawing back. Trent's laugh came out sharp and sour, like biting into a rotten apple. Whatever helps you sleep, Isabella. We're not biting. He swung around and walked off, his jab hanging in the air like smoke, and I spotted too many heads bobbing in agreement, way too many. Edward's mess wasn't just clogging up the ledgers, it had wormed into their heads. I barged into my office and smashed the door shut, the glass jittering like it might shatter, then collapsed into the chair. My phone flared up, Mateo texting fast, PR's handling it, legals slapping him with defamation, keep your chin up. But up felt like it was on another planet. The walls started squeezing in, the city's rumble outside the window morphing into this deafening wave of blame. I cracked open my laptop, and emails hit me like an avalanche, reporters digging, clients prying, even a board member hollering for answers. Apex was swaying like a rickety bridge, and I was the one stuck trying to keep it from crashing, me, the gal running on fumes, still hearing Edward's, "You're nothing," sneak into every silent second. That night, home was no hideout. Mateo was stalking back and forth across the living room, phone mashed against his ear, his tone climbing as he tore into his crisis squad. No, we shove back now, real proof, not empty words. He smashed the phone down, raking a hand through his hair, and I saw the wear, frustration carving creases into his face, a guy who'd stacked up an empire now scrambling to hold the pieces. I lingered in the doorway, gripping a glass of water I hadn't sipped, and our gazes crashed together. "They're swallowing it whole, Isabella," he said, his voice dropping low and tired. "Edward's got the upper hand." "He doesn't," I pushed back, but it sounded thin, like a weak echo. "We've got the real deal, his thieving, the drive. We just gotta. Facts don't mean jack if they won't buy in." He cut me off, harsh, then winced and dialed it back. "Sorry. I just didn't think he'd sink this low." I plunked the glass down, my hands shaky as hell. "Me neither. But he's pulling us both under, Javi, and it's ripping us up." The space between us got dense, this quiet tension we hadn't put a name to slinking in. He stretched out a hand, but I backed off, needing room, needing to suck in some air. Next morning, Apex felt like a damn war camp. I rolled in and caught a huddle of folks by the break room, their voices low but biting, cutting through the coffee maker's hum like a blade. I eased up, snagging scraps of talk. "If she's tangled in this, why should we give a damn what she says?" My stomach dropped. It was Sarah from marketing, her words dripping with acid, backed by Trent's rough grunt, "She ain't no boss, just Mateo's megaphone. Edward told us so." I pressed flat against the wall, out of their line of sight, their digs twisting in my gut like a corkscrew. They didn't believe in me, not my lead, not my truth. I was losing them fast, losing it all. I could have hightailed it right then, back to Mateo, back to letting him mop up the mess, but something in me sparked, a little flame kicking up in the shadows. Hell no. Edward wasn't snagging this win, not with his lies, not this way. I pulled myself tall, my heartbeat thumping like a war chant, and stormed to my office. Lila was there, eyes bloodshot but solid, holding a pile of printouts, the straight-up financials, Edward stealing spelled out clear as day. "We've got what we need," she said, fierce and unshaken. "You just gotta lay it out for M." I swallowed hard and gave a tight nod. "I'm on it. No more riding Mateo's coattails, this is my stand." I snatched the files, their bulk steadying me like an anchor, and spun to tackle the chaos. Edward's sucker punch had rattled Apex down to its studs, but I wasn't his stooge, or Mateo's either. I was the one in this damn chair, and I'd prove it, no question. The city might be yelling, the crew might be second-guessing, but I was done folding. Time to throw down. The Apex conference room reeked of day-old donuts and jittery sweat, this big glass and steel cave that sucked up noise and spat it back like a ricochet. It was Monday morning, the city still chewing over Edward's bull, and I stood at the head of this stretched-out table, eyeballing a crowd of faces, 43 workers, some sprawled out, some stiff as planks, all sizing me up to see if I was the crook the news swore I was. My hands locked onto a stack of files, the edges jabbing into my palms like little wake-up stings, and my blazer hugged me tight, like it was the only thing keeping me in one piece while the rest dangled on the edge of falling apart. That night, I hooked up with Mateo at his downtown office, a slick joint full of polished wood and glass, a million miles from the mess at Apex. He was posted up by the window, city lights bouncing off his frame, and he turned as I stepped in. "You were a damn rock star today," he said, closing the distance quick, his hands grabbing mine. Word spreading about that meeting, Isabella Vega, the CEO who came out swinging. I cracked a tired grin, pride slugging it out with the exhaustion sitting heavy in my chest. "We swung together. That recording you handed over locked it down." He shook his head, tugging me in close. "Nah, this was all you. I just tossed you the gear, you're the one driving this rig now." His belief hit me like a warm blanket, steady and real, and for once, I bought into it too. Out there, sirens whined in the distance, Edward's arrest creeping closer, though we didn't have a clue yet. The cops were tightening the net, loaded up with our proof, his web of bulls starting to cave. Apex wasn't out of the woods, not with Trent's dirty look still stuck in my head, not with Edward's crazy energy still loose, but standing there, hands locked with Mateo, I felt the wheel under my grip. I wasn't just hanging on anymore, I was calling the shots. Tuesday night rolled in, and the city smelled like rain gearing up to drop, a sharp, buzzing edge hanging over the streets as I gripped the steering wheel heading home from Apex. The news had gone quiet since our press blast hit, Edward's lies getting shredded by the truth, but this twist in my gut kept whispering he wasn't done, not by a long shot. I'd seen the hate blazing in his eyes when he'd stormed out, his promise, "I'll rip this place apart," still ringing in my ears like a bad song I couldn't ditch. Mateo's recording was with the cops now, paired with the dirt Lila and I had dug up, but the quiet felt too thick, too charged. Trouble was brewing, and it was gunning right for us. Meanwhile, across town in some grimy warehouse Edward was using as a bolt hole, he was hunched over a wobbly table, the air choking with cig smoke and panic. I didn't catch it live, couldn't, but later, I pieced it together from hushed talk and courtroom scraps, like a nightmare playing out in my head. Tony Dutton was parked across from him, that scar on his cheek glowing under the laptop's light, his twitchy fingers uploading a file. It was their Hail Mary, a hacked-up audio of Mateo, twisted to make it sound like he'd strong-armed Edward into dumping Apex, one last blackmail swing to shove us out. Edward's laugh came out rough and wild, his hands jittering as he sparked another cigarette. "This'll gut Vega," he growled, eyes bugging out. "Him and that little wife too, they'll crawl back begging me to take it." Tony gave a nod, but his jaw was locked tight, his eyes darting to the door. He'd clocked the news, felt the walls closing in, our evidence was bulletproof, and Edward's frantic flailing was a boat taking on water. The file went live, pinged to Mateo's lawyer with a note, "Drop the charges, or this hits the streets." Edward leaned back, smirking like he'd won, but Tony was already scheming, his allegiance unraveling like a cheap sweater. Back home, Mateo was waiting at the door, his phone lighting up with a fresh ping. "They've got something," he said, voice low and sharp, pulling me into his study. The lawyer's email stared back from the screen, Edward's blackmail stunt, fake audio clipped on. I listened, my stomach flipping as Mateo's voice, mangled and off, crackled out, "Hand over Apex, or I'll bury you." It was sloppy, a dead giveaway to anyone who knew him, but in the wrong hands, it could have sparked the fire all over again. Mateo's fist balled up, his breath hissing out fast. "He's clawing at straws, Isabella. This is his last pathetic shot." I nodded, my own temper kicking up. "It's not gonna cut it. We've got the real him, his threats, his sticky fingers. He's toast." Mateo dialed the cops, shipped them the file, and in hours, they were rolling, tires squealing toward that warehouse, lights cutting through the night. Come morning, I was in Apex's lobby, eyes glued to the wall TV flickering with the headline, "Edward Vance nabbed in fraud bust," ticker taping across the bottom. I stood there, heart thumping, watching the clip of him getting dragged out, wrists cuffed tight. His suit was a wrinkled mess, his face twisted with rage and shock, yelling at the cameras, "It's a frame job. Vega set me up." But the reporter's cool voice sliced through, "Police dug up legit recordings and financials proving Vance's theft, blowing his story apart. Tony wasn't in the shot, rumor had it he'd flipped, spilling his guts to dodge the fall, leaving Edward to sink solo." The crew crowded around me, a quiet settling in as we watched Edward's tumble play out on the screen. A few let out rough cheers, "Good riddance," slicing through the stillness, but others just stared, their eyes locked on me, sizing me up, waiting to see what I'd do next. I turned and headed upstairs, a buzz of triumph pumping through me, when Trent planted himself in my way, his big frame clogging the hallway. He'd been a pain in my ass from the jump, Edward's loudest shadow, and there he was, arms folded tight, his voice rumbling low and mean. "You figure this fixes it all, Isabella? You're still a fluke to me. Edward's out, but I ain't kissing your boots." The air snapped tight, head swiveling, a dozen stares drilling into us. I could have dodged it, let security deal with his crap, but something broke loose, months of his smirks, Edward's jabs, the grind of proving I belonged. I stepped right up, close enough to catch the coffee stink on his breath, my tone hard as nails. "I don't need you groveling, Trent. Just do your job or hit the road. I'm the CEO, not your nanny. Pick a lane, 'cause I'm through messing around. He blinked, thrown off, and I caught it, a quick flash of uncertainty, maybe a hint of nerves. The room went dead silent, everybody holding their breath, then he backed off, grumbling low as he slunk away. A wave of murmurs rolled through, nods, a vibe of respect, and it sank in, like a badge I'd earned with my own sweat. I hit the elevator, my heels tapping out a rhythm with some real grit, and rode up to my office solo. Later, I rolled up to the courthouse, needing to see the endgame with my own eyes. Mateo was there waiting, his hand sliding into mine as we slipped into the back row. The place was bare bones, harsh lights buzzing overhead, the smell of old wood hanging heavy, and it thrummed as Edward stood at the defendant's table, cuffed and shrunk down small. His lawyer flailed while the judge rattled off the rap sheet: fraud, pocketing cash, blackmail. Our recordings, that thumb drive, Tony's turncoat story, it all stacked up, burying Edward's weak yells under the gavel's bang. When they hauled him out, chains gleaming, his eyes snagged mine across the room. That look was pure poison, but it was toothless now, a rattler with no bite. I didn't budge, I just stared, Mateo's hand solid next to me, as they dragged him off, beat, alone, a big shot brought low by that nobody he'd laughed at. That afternoon, I posted up at my office window at Apex, the city stretching out below like a prize I'd clawed my way to claim. Downstairs, the team was buzzing, getting back to work, trust starting to sprout. Trent hadn't bailed, not yet, but he'd gone quiet, and that was win enough for me. Edward's reign was dust now, his kingdom burned out, while mine was climbing. I'd faced him down, faced them all, and I'd come out on top, not just for Mateo, not just for Apex, but for me, damn it. Come mid-March, the morning sun poured across my desk at Apex Innovations like melted gold, catching the corners of papers and pens, turning the glass walls into a kaleidoscope of light. Weeks had passed since Edward got marched out in cuffs, and the air in here felt fresher now, lighter, like the city'd finally let out a sigh it had been choking on. I stood by the window, coffee steaming in my grip, eyeballing the skyline as it sparkled with a future I'd fought tooth and nail to grab. Below, the office was alive again, not with whispers or second-guessing, but with real drive. Phones jangled, keyboards clicked away, even a laugh or two drifted up from the break room. Apex was kicking, and I was the one at the wheel, hands steady and sure. Those first days after Edward's flop weren't a cakewalk. The company was a beat-up old boat, cash leaking out, spirits trashed, clients twitchy from all the drama. I'd walked into board meetings with my gut twisted tight, facing suits who looked at me like a dice roll they weren't sold on. But I had Lila's hard numbers, Mateo's rock-solid belief, and a fire in me that wouldn't quit. We'd snatched Edward's hidden loot, every dirty offshore buck, and pumped it back into paychecks, bonuses, even a new coffee maker that didn't cough up mud. I'd sat down with every crew, heard them out, Trent's gang griping about targets, Sarah pleading for decent software, and I delivered. No more king on a throne orders, no more leather chair dictators. I'd promised them a say, and I'd stuck to it. The changes hit fast, better hours, open books, and a mentorship gig. Lila cooked up that turned shy interns into live wires. The crew picked up on it. Sarah quit dodging my eyes, her "thanks, Isabella," over some new design gear landing heavier than I'd figured it would. Trent kept his edge, but he'd punched the clock every day since I stared him down, his quiet a shaky peace deal. Word got out, old clients circled back, new ones started ringing, and Apex's heartbeat kicked up a notch. I wasn't just keeping it afloat anymore, I was stacking something solid, one hard-headed brick at a time. That afternoon, I parked myself at my desk, the room still except for the faint scratch of my pen on paper. A contract sat in front of me, TechSphere, a decent-sized outfit itching for Apex to revamp their setup, a six-figure score that had been dangling out there for months. Edward had tanked the pitch, too busy siphoning cash to give a damn, but I'd torn it down and built it back up, late nights with Lila, ideas scratched out on napkins, a plan that was mine, not his. Now, their CEO's email lit up my screen, "We're sold." Signed by 5 p.m. My pulse hammered, nerves and excitement slugging it out, as I scrawled my name, Isabella Vega, Chief Executive Officer, the swoop of it sharp and done. I rocked back, the pen clattering down, and let out a long breath I didn't know was stuck in me. My first big win, locked in a chair I'd claimed as my own. Apex wasn't just hanging on, it was roaring, and I'd made that happen. Home that night felt like a safe harbor, the kitchen glowing with the smell of Mateo's paella, windows cracked to let in a spring breeze that danced through. He was at the stove, apron slung loose, humming some random tune I couldn't peg, and I watched him from the doorway, my anchor, my teammate, the guy who'd spotted this spark in me way before I did. I dropped my bag with a soft thump, and he spun around, a grin splitting his face wide. "Big day, huh?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I stepped over, yanking the contract from my bag and sliding it onto the counter. Locked in tech sphere. "It's real, Apex is back in the game." His eyes flared with pride, bright and fierce, as he pulled me into a bear hug, his grip steady as ever. "I knew you'd do it," he mumbled into my hair. "You're a freight train, Isabella," I called it that first night. I let out a laugh, lighter than it had been in forever. "You did, but I wasn't sold back then. Edward had me so knotted up, I thought I'd be stuck down there for good." He eased back, hands clamping my shoulders, his stare dead on. "You didn't just crawl out, you smashed his whole damn world and built yours from the rubble. I'm proud as hell of you." That hit deep, warming me up like a shot of good whiskey. We settled at the table, plates steaming between us, and chewed over stuff, not Apex or Edward, but us, how we'd ridden out the chaos, his behind-the-scenes plays, my full-on brawls, and came out tougher. "I wouldn't have pulled it off without you," I said, fork hovering. "That recording, the buyout, you handed me the shot." Mateo shook his head, his grin soft. "I gave you a nudge. You took the jump. That's all you, Carino." He grabbed my hand, his thumb grazing my knuckles, and I felt it, the team we'd hammered out, not just husband and wife, but partners who'd crushed it side by side. Later, after the dishes rattled in the sink and the house hushed down, I swung back to Apex. The place was dark except for my desk lamp's glow, and I posted up at the window again, the city twinkling below like a map I'd drawn myself. I followed the skyline with my eyes, those towers that used to loom over me, now just signposts on a road I'd hacked out. Edward's "You're Nothing" still crept in sometimes, but it was quieter now, swallowed by the rumble of a company I'd brought back, a crew that had my back, a deal with my signature on it. I wasn't nothing, I was every damn thing I'd battled to become. My phone buzzed, Lila texting, TechSphere's pumped. More calls lined up tomorrow. You're crushing it. I smirked, setting it down, and pressed my hands to the cool glass. This was my time, fresh and hard-won, all mine. No more lurking shadows, no more second-guessing. I'd kicked off as a piece on Edward's board, a sidekick in Mateo's scheme, but I'd finished as the boss, the spark, the woman who turned a wreck into a win. The city sprawled out ahead, big and breathing, and I wasn't just in it anymore, I was molding it. And that's where my tale wraps, for now. From Edward's crash to Apex's comeback, it's been a wild haul, and I'm damn glad you've stuck with me through it all. If this yarn about payback, grit, and snatching what's mine lit you up or got your blood pumping, don't bottle it up. Toss a comment down below, tell me what part had you hollering the loudest, or what you'd have done if you were me. I'm reading every word, so let's keep this heat rolling. Oh, and if you haven't yet, smack that like button, it's the quickest way to say you're hungry for more like this. Hit subscribe and tap the bell too, 'cause I've got plenty more brewing, new fights, new wins, all ready to spill out. Thanks for riding along, and I'll catch you in the next one. Till then, keep scrapping for your own turf.